Okay, hello everybody. So today I'm going to be answering the question, can a tomato plant grow in a storage container? And we're starting off with a nice looking emoji, and let's get into it. So some background info, the tomato plant is a common household food. People eat it all the time, use it in salads or as sauces. The plant itself has a taproot system, which means it has one big central root going down deep into the ground and a bunch of tiny roots branching off laterally. The stems and branches are covered in tiny hairs and they vary in colors from light green to dark blue green. And just like any other flowering plant, if the tomato plant successfully pollinates, the fruit will begin to develop. And to successfully pollinate, to grow a nice big tomato, to grow tall, the plant needs a few things. It needs a warm climate with about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight per day. It needs to be planted in loose, well-draining soil. It needs generous amount of water daily, so not too much, but you obviously can't give it not enough. About 1 to 2 inches per week in all, I guess. And it also needs enough space to grow. You don't want to overly crowd your plants. So materials and methods are what I did in my experiment. So my hypothesis was if a tomato plant is grown in an airtight container, then it will not grow as tall as if it were grown in exposed air. When I say exposed air, I just mean air like in my room. I don't mean like any special type of air. So on February 4th, 35 tomato seeds were planted. 20 were planted in the airtight storage container, an example on the right, and 15 were planted in exposed air. The seeds were planted in plant starting mix in small brown cups, and there were 2 seeds per cup for the airtight group and 3 seeds per cup for the exposed air group. 8 to 10 sprays of water were given daily between 4 and 8 p.m., and this actually changed a little down the road after I had some growing difficulties, so that ended up changing to 15 sprays. And the plants were always left in room temperature, and measurements were taken every 3 days in centimeters for 1 month. So now we're going to go look at the data and the results I got. So if we take a Y view, we see I have a bunch of different charts and tables. We have the control raw data, I would like to call it, over here. And we have the experimental data. And after each day of taking measurements, I had the average of the height for that day. And we can see when we get down to the last day, the control group was 14.5 centimeters, whereas the experimental group was 15.5 centimeters. So we can see that the plants in the airtight container grew taller than the control group. And there's just another table just comparing those same numbers, the averages, for a better side-by-side look. And this graph over here also is a good visual representation of what happened, how the airtight actually grew taller and how it always, besides the first day, which was very weird, the airtight plants always were just taller than the exposed air plants. And the last table I had was just a table comparing the average growth rate. So daily it was 0.4 to 0.5 centimeters, and every 3 days it was 1.2 to about 1.5 centimeters. And these are just estimations because I rounded my numbers to the nearest tenth. So if you were actually to calculate these numbers and compare it with like my final numbers, it wouldn't be exactly the same, but that's just because I rounded. And yeah, so now let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so what I was able to conclude was that my hypothesis was incorrect and that the airtight samples actually did grow taller than the exposed air samples. And just to review, the numbers were 15.5 to 14.5 centimeters, and the growth rate per day was 0.5 to 0.4. So there was a very small difference in the numbers. And there were not only differences in the height and the growth rate, but also the way the plants actually grew. So if we take a look at the airtight samples, we can see that the stems and branches are like very small. These are bending everywhere. They're a lot messy. The leaves are tiny and they just don't look as healthy. Whereas in the exposed air samples, the stems are standing straight up and tall. They look healthy. The leaves are big. They're looking good. And I think this had to do with overwatering, because the airtight samples, every time I went to water them, the cups were drenched in water. Like the plants didn't need to be watered, but I watered them anyway because I wanted to keep everything I was doing the same between both groups. The exposed air samples, each time I went to water them, it was perfect timing. They needed a little bit of water and I gave it to them, and I think that's why they grew healthier looking. And even though the airtight did end up growing taller by a little, I think if I didn't overwater them, then we would have seen a greater difference in the height. I hope you enjoyed my presentation and have a good day.